You know exactly what a broken bone looks like on an X-ray. I mean, it's super clean, it's binary.
Right.
There's this jagged white line on a black background, and the doctor just points to it and says, there is your problem.
Yeah, you literally see the break.
Exactly. And we expect that level of precision from medicine. But what does a broken sleep cycle look like? Because for decades, the medical establishment essentially told us it looked like bad habits.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you were told you had too much screen time, or your bedroom was too warm, or maybe you're just drinking coffee too late.
Right, the whole sleep hygiene thing.
Yeah, we were essentially told that bad sleep is a behavioral failing on our part. But today's source material suggests we've been, well, entirely wrong about that.
Yeah, it completely flips the script.
It suggests that if you are struggling with sleep right now, the problem might not be behavioral at all. It might be a severe fundamental chemical deficiency.
Which forces this massive paradigm shift. Because the sources we are looking at today, they move us away from this idea that the human body is just some machine.
Right.
Like a laptop that just needs you to, click the shutdown menu at the end of the day.
Just power it off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Instead, we have to start looking at the body as this incredibly complex chemical ecosystem. And like any ecosystem, it just cannot run its internal repair programs if it's starved of the necessary raw materials.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we have a really fascinating transcript today featuring a neurologist who spent years treating chronic headaches and sleep apnea.
Yeah, and it's almost like a detective story.
It really is. Through what was basically a series of clinical accidents and deep dives into forgotten medical literature, she uncovered this hidden, highly complex connection between our sleep architecture, the bacteria in our gut, and two very specific things.
Vitamin D and the B vitamin complex.
Yes. Our mission today is to figure out this complex web of biochemistry, explain why modern indoor lifestyles have totally broken our sleep switches, and explore a radically different approach to fixing it.
And what she discovered challenges dogmas that have been entrenched in medicine for half a century.
Right.
We are trained to look at a symptom, isolate the specific organ presenting that symptom, and just prescribe a compound to suppress it.
Just put a Band-Aid on it.
Basically, yeah. But what makes this neurologist's journey so compelling is her absolute refusal to accept that a symptom exists in a vacuum. She just kept pulling the biological thread, demanding to know the actual root cause of the failure.
And that thread actually starts in a headache clinic, which is so weird. I want to jump straight into the mechanics of this, because the traditional medical playbook falls apart almost immediately in her clinical notes.
It does.
She is treating patients for chronic daily headaches. But these aren't the typical patients you'd expect to see in a sleep apnea study, right?
Not at all. I mean, the dogmatic profile for sleep apnea, the profile that medical students were taught for decades, was highly specific and purely anatomical.
Right, the classic stereotype.
Exactly. It was the older, heavily overweight male patient.
Yeah.
The assumption was that thick neck tissue and a large tongue physically collapsed backward under the force of gravity, obstructing the airway during sleep. It was viewed entirely as a structural plumbing issue.
Just gravity and fat tissue blocking a tube.
Precisely.
But the patients sitting in front of this neurologist were young, thin women in their 20s and 30s. They just did not have the physical mass to obstruct an airway.
Right. Yet, when one of these young women with severe 5-year chronic headaches demanded a sleep study, the results showed classic sleep apnea.
Wow.
Her airway was collapsing, so they put her on a CPAP machine.
That's the continuous positive airway pressure device, right? The math.
Yeah, a mask that forces a stream of air down the nasal passage to physically inflate the airway like a balloon. And here's the crazy part. Within 2 months of using this pressurized air, her 5-year history of chronic headaches completely vanished.
Which, if you think about it, raises an immediate red flag.
Oh, absolutely.
Because head pain is generated in the brainstem. It's a neurological biochemical signal. So why would blowing air into someone's nose fix a biochemical pain switch in the center of their brain? The plumbing analogy just doesn't explain that.
It doesn't. To understand the mechanism behind that, we really have to dismantle how we think about sleep itself.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So we tend to view sleep as a single block of unconsciousness.
Yeah.
But it's actually a highly orchestrated descent through different physiological states.
Right.
You start in stages 1 and 2, which is light sleep. Your heart rate slows slightly, but you're still easily roused. Then you drop into slow wave sleep, the deep sleep, where the brain waves become very large and rhythmic.
And then REM.
Exactly. You transition into REM, or rapid eye movement sleep.
And REM is usually described as the dream state, but the source material makes it clear that structurally it is a highly volatile period for the body.
It's intensely demanding.
Right.
During REM, your brain is firing with almost the exact same electrical intensity as when you are wide awake.
That's wild.
You are processing emotional memory, you are clearing out metabolic waste from the neurons, you're experiencing vivid, complex hallucinations that we call dreams. But if your brain believes you are sprinting away from a predator in a dream, your motor cortex is actively sending the physical signals to your legs to run.
Which is obviously a massive liability if you're lying in bed.
Exactly. So the body requires a failsafe to keep you from injuring yourself.
And that failsafe is the brainstem, right?
Yes. The brainstem, which sits at the base of the skull, initiates a state of total systemic paralysis. This muscle atonia affects almost every voluntary muscle in your body. It's an evolutionary mechanism observed in almost all animals, down to fruit flies. It prevents you from acting out your dreams, but more importantly, it allows the physical structures of the body, including the airway, to become completely slack so that deep cellular repair can occur.
I just want to pause on that vulnerability for a second. You are completely unconscious, your brain is electrically hyperactive, and your physical body is entirely immobilized.
Yeah, completely offline physically.
Your breathing tube has to remain open autonomously while the muscles supporting it are entirely paralyzed. That has to require an immense amount of precise chemical signaling.
It requires a flawless handover within the autonomic nervous system.
Okay, break that down for us.
Think of the autonomic nervous system as having two distinct operating systems. The sympathetic side is your fight-or-flight mode. It dries up your heart rate, releases adrenaline, prepares you for immediate survival.
Right, the stress mode.
Exactly. The parasympathetic side is the rest and digest mode. It slows the heart, initiates digestion, and runs those complex repair protocols.
And the source notes that our sleep cycles are actually divided between these two systems, right? Like the first half of the night, roughly until 3.0 a.m., is surprisingly dominated by the sympathetic system.
It is, yeah.
But that crucial second half, from 3.0 a.m. to 7.0 a.m., is when the parasympathetic system really takes full control to drive us into those deep, paralyzed REM states.
And here's the kicker. If the brainstem lacks the precise neurochemistry to engage the parasympathetic state, the entire process just aborts.
It just stops.
Yes, the brainstem evaluates its chemical resources and essentially determines that it cannot safely execute the paralysis protocol. If it paralyzes the airway without the proper chemical support, you could suffocate.
Oh, wow.
So it simply refuses to let you enter REM sleep.
Let me see if I can map this to a physical system. Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like the master electrical breaker box in the basement of a large building.
Okay, I like that.
You can invest heavily in behavioral changes, right? Buying the best blackout curtains, getting a high-end mattress, turning the thermostat down to 65 degrees. You are essentially just changing the light bulbs in the building.
Right, the superficial stuff.
Yeah. But if the master breaker box is short-circuiting because it literally lacks the power to flip the switches, the house is staying dark. You are not getting REM sleep, no matter how many behavioral rules you follow.
That analogy captures the mechanical failure perfectly. And the downstream consequences of that master switch failing are catastrophic.
Because no REM means no repair.
Exactly. Without REM sleep, you lose memory consolidation, you lose mood regulation, which explains why so many of these patients presented with severe anxiety and depression and were subsequently misdiagnosed and handed psychiatric medications.
That is so tragic.
It is. Furthermore, the pain gates in the brain, which are supposed to reset to a default off position during deep sleep, begin to spontaneously flip on. That is the actual root cause of the chronic daily headaches.
And there's a specific clinical example in the text that highlights how invisible this damage can be. The neurologist treats this 18-year-old girl.
Oh, right, the college student.
Yeah. She looks perfectly healthy. She's about to leave for college, but she suffers from these debilitating daily headaches. And she reports that she sleeps perfectly well. She goes to bed at night, wakes up in the morning, and has zero memory of waking up in between.
But the EEG data from her sleep study told a completely different story. She was experiencing zero deep sleep.
None at all.
Zero. Her brain would attempt the descent into REM. The brainstem would realize it lacked the chemical resources to safely paralyze her, and it would trigger a microarousal, snapping her back into light sleep.
Just bouncing her back out.
Yes. This happened every 15 minutes, all night long. She never fully woke up, so she had no conscious awareness of it, but her brain was trapped in an endless loop of aborted repair cycles.
And the neurologist looking at this data realizes this isn't just some minor sleep quirk. It is a fundamental collapse of cellular maintenance. And she connects this to an even darker trend in her neurology clinic. She's seeing 28-year-olds coming in with strokes.
Which is terrifying.
Yeah.
We historically associate strokes with advanced age, with decades of accumulating cardiovascular disease, diabetes, or heavy smoking.
Right.
A stroke in a 28-year-old signifies an incredible acceleration of vascular decay.
Right.
Every single day, our blood vessels sustain micro-tears from blood pressure and physical movement.
Just from being alive.
Just from living. Deep sleep is when the body patches those tears. If you prevent a body from entering deep sleep for a decade, that microdamage compounds until a blood vessel simply ruptures.
It's the equivalent of driving a vehicle 100 miles every single day and never once changing the oil or replacing the brake pads. Eventually, the engine just seizes. The source contrasts these sick, young, urban patients with an observation the neurologist made while visiting Mexico. She spent time observing traditional communities where older men lived in palapas.
Those are the open-air thatch huts, right?
Yeah, totally open to the environment, without electricity.
And these individuals were living outside, entirely synchronized with the solar cycle, and they did not exhibit sleep apnea. They were not suffering from the obesity epidemic.
They were just healthy.
They experienced restorative sleep and lived to advanced ages without the chronic systemic diseases that are just overwhelming modern indoor populations.
They weren't practicing sleep hygiene or, buying white noise machines on Amazon. They were just existing within the biological parameters our species evolved to expect.
Exactly.
So if this master breaker box in the brainstem is failing due to our modern indoor environment, what exactly is the chemical power it is missing? What is the specific fuel required to run the parasympathetic system?
This is where we identify the specific neurotransmitter responsible for the transition. The chemical messenger that the brainstem uses to paralyze the body, slow the heart rate, and engage the parasympathetic nervous system is acetylcholine.
Acetylcholine. We constantly hear about dopamine for reward or adrenaline for stress, but acetylcholine just seems to be completely overlooked in popular discussions about sleep.
It really is, but it's the primary neurochemical driver of the parasympathetic state. If you are deficient in acetylcholine, you cannot execute the repair protocols. Full stop.
So the neurologist identifies that her patients are deficient in this neurotransmitter, but this isn't a situation where she can just write a prescription for an acetylcholine pill, is it?
No, it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier effectively like that.
Okay.
She had to figure out the biosynthesis, how the body manufactures it internally, and why that manufacturing process had halted in her patients.
Which required a deep dive into historical medical literature, leading her to the work of a researcher named Walter Stump.
Yes, Stump.
And Stump had published extensive research in the 1980s regarding vitamin D. I want to dig into Stump's research, because the source points out that his work was largely ignored for 30 years. Why on earth would the medical establishment ignore something this critical for decades?
It comes down to medical dogma and how we categorize compounds. In the 1980s, the pharmaceutical industry was heavily focused on synthesizing novel, patentable drugs to target specific disease pathways.
The whole blockbuster drug era.
Exactly. Vitamins were generally viewed by mainstream medicine as over-the-counter supplements, things you take to avoid scurvy, perhaps, but not powerful agents of systemic disease reversal.
Right.
Walter Stump, however, was mapping something profound. He used autoradiography to track exactly where vitamin D was going in the brain.
And what did he find?
He discovered massive, dense clusters of vitamin D receptors located specifically on the nuclei of the brainstem.
The exact biological real estate that controls sleep timing and paralysis.
Exactly. The biological clock, the areas that dictate our circadian rhythm, are absolutely saturated with vitamin D receptors. Stump proved that vitamin D operates on a completely different level than a standard vitamin. It enters the cell, penetrates the nucleus, and binds directly to the DNA.
Wait, it literally goes into the nucleus and binds to DNA?
Yes.
So if vitamin D is binding to the DNA, it's essentially unlocking a genetic recipe. Let me guess. Is it the recipe for the acetylcholine itself?
Close. But it's one step upstream. It unlocks the recipe for a highly specific enzyme called choline acetyltransferase.
Okay, without getting lost in the chemistry jargon, what is the function of that enzyme?
It is the biological machine that takes the raw materials in your brain and synthesizes them into acetylcholine.
Oh, okay, so this is the cascading mechanism.
Yes, map it out.
You need vitamin D to enter the nucleus and trigger the creation of the enzyme. The enzyme manufactures the acetylcholine. The acetylcholine allows the brainstem to engage the parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic system paralyzes the body, allowing you to enter deep REM sleep and repair the cellular damage that would otherwise cause a stroke at age 28.
That's the chain.
It is a direct, unbreakable chain of causality.
It is absolute biological dependency, which forces us to confront a massive historical error in medical nomenclature.
The name itself.
Yes, vitamin D is misclassified. It is not a vitamin at all.
The source is incredibly aggressive about correcting this terminology.
And rightfully so, because the label changes how we treat it clinically. A vitamin, by definition, is a micronutrient that an organism requires for survival but cannot synthesize internally.
Right, like we have to eat it.
Exactly. You must acquire it from your environment or your diet. Humans cannot make vitamin C, so we must consume it. But vitamin D is an endogenous hormone.
A hormone.
More specifically, it is a psychosteroid hormone that our own bodies manufacture. The process begins when our skin is exposed to UVB radiation from sunlight.
Okay.
The ultraviolet light interacts with a specific type of cholesterol in the deeper layers of our skin, converting it into previtamin D3, which then undergoes further synthesis in the liver and kidneys.
So we literally photosynthesize our own hormones.
Essentially, yes.
Sure.
Because we evolved as a relatively hairless diurnal species, we relied on direct solar radiation hitting our skin to manufacture this critical signaling molecule. We were never designed to source it primarily from our digestive tract.
I have to challenge this on behalf of the skeptical listener, though.
Bring it on.
Because the immediate counterargument is always diet. People will say, look, I drink milk fortified with vitamin D, I eat wild-caught salmon, surely I can just eat my way out of this deficiency without having to sit out in the sun.
It's a very logical assumption based on the vitamin label, but the source uses a rather blunt analogy to dismantle it.
Oh, I love this part.
When you consume salmon to acquire vitamin D, you are consuming salmon vitamin D. You're eating a hormone that a fish synthesized for the specific biological requirements of its own aquatic body.
Right.
The neurologist argues that attempting to regulate a human brainstem by eating fish hormones is as absurd as eating salmon to get salmon estrogen, hoping it will regulate a human reproductive cycle.
That reframes it entirely. You wouldn't take a fish's estrogen, so why are we relying on a fish's sunlight hormone?
Precisely. But because it retained the vitamin label, conservative medicine just treated it like a minor dietary supplement. And this classification error completely ruined decades of clinical research.
How does the label ruin the research?
Well, it dictates the methodology of the trials. The gold standard for pharmaceutical research is the randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial.
Sure.
You give 1,000 people a fixed 10-milligram dose of a drug, you give 1,000 people a placebo, and you measure the difference. But hormones do not behave like synthetic drugs. They operate within a very tight, individualized biological economy.
Because 10 milligrams might be way too much for one person and absolutely nothing for another.
Exactly. When an endocrinologist prescribes testosterone or thyroid hormone, they don't give every patient the exact same dose. They draw blood, they find the baseline, they prescribe a specific amount, and then they test the blood again a month later to see how the body metabolized it.
They titrate it.
Right. The goal is a highly specific target level in the blood. But in the early 2000s, researchers were running massive trials where they gave everyone a fixed generic dose of 4,000 IUs of vitamin D, regardless of their body mass, their baseline deficiency, or their daily sun exposure.
Which is clinically useless. I mean, it's like giving everyone in a hospital ward a fixed 10 units of insulin, regardless of whether they have low blood sugar or are in a full-blown diabetic coma. The results are going to be chaotic.
And the results were highly inconsistent. Some people improved, some didn't, some got worse. And instead of recognizing the flawed methodology of treating a hormone like a fixed-dose drug, the medical establishment just concluded that vitamin D supplementation was ineffective.
That is so frustrating.
They actively told doctors to stop wasting money testing vitamin D levels, which effectively shut down clinical curiosity about the very molecule governing our sleep architecture.
It left the public completely blind to the root cause of their exhaustion. The source also brings up a fascinating evolutionary adaptation to highlight how sensitive we are to our solar environment.
The redhead mutation.
Yes, the redhead genetic mutation.
This is a perfect illustration of how our biology is inextricably linked to our latitude. Melanin is the pigment in our skin that acts as a natural defense against the DNA-damaging effects of intense ultraviolet radiation.
It's like an evolutionary sunblock.
Yes. However, if you possess high levels of melanin, the UVB radiation struggles to penetrate the skin deeply enough to interact with the cholesterol. Therefore, it requires significantly more time in the sun to manufacture adequate vitamin D.
Which is fine if you live near the equator where it's sunny all the time. But what happens when human populations migrated to far northern latitudes, like Scotland or Scandinavia?
In those environments, direct sunlight is scarce and heavy cloud cover is the norm. If you have high melanin in that environment, it is an evolutionary death sentence.
Wow.
You will not produce enough vitamin D, you will develop severe rickets, your bones will deform, and you will likely die before reproducing. To survive, these northern populations developed a genetic mutation, the redhead gene, specifically variants of the MC1R gene, which results in very low melanin, fair skin, and freckles.
Okay.
This genetic adaptation allowed them to maximize the synthesis of vitamin D from the minimal diffuse UVB light that managed to penetrate the northern cloud cover.
It is literally an evolutionary superpower designed to harvest scarce sunlight. But the source points out the cruel irony of modern migration here.
Yes.
You take a family with that specific Scottish or Viking genetic lineage, and you relocate them to a high UV index environment like modern-day Texas.
And the environment violently rejects their genetics. They burn severely within minutes of sun exposure. So logically, they adapt their behavior, they retreat into air-conditioned homes and offices.
That stay inside.
Right. When they do go outside, they cover themselves in clothing or apply SPF 50 sunscreen, which effectively creates a chemical barrier that blocks UVB radiation. They have taken a genetic profile designed to aggressively absorb sunlight and place it in an environment where they actively block 100% of it.
And they become profoundly chronically deficient in vitamin D.
Exactly.
And following the cascade we just established, no vitamin D means no choline acetyltransferase enzyme. No enzyme means no acetylcholine. No acetylcholine means the brainstem refuses to paralyze the body, and deep REM sleep vanishes.
The neurologist pieces all of this together. It's a remarkable moment of clinical synthesis.
So what does she do?
She begins drawing blood from her headache and sleep apnea patients and finds that, universally, their vitamin D levels are abysmal. She doesn't use a fixed dose. She starts aggressively supplementing them with high-dose vitamin D, constantly monitoring their blood work until they reach an optimal blood concentration of roughly 60 nanograms per milliliter.
And the results are staggering. The headaches disappear. The CPAP machines just go into the closet. They are sleeping through the night. I mean, it seems like the perfect medical victory.
It appeared to be a total cure, but biology is rarely that simple. When you manipulate one major lever in a complex ecosystem, you inevitably destabilize something else.
And this is where the story gets wild.
Yeah.
Because for 2 years, the vitamin D protocol works flawlessly. And then a massive, seemingly inexplicable medical crisis begins unfolding in her clinic.
The very same patients who had finally achieved restorative sleep started returning to her office, presenting with a constellation of entirely new, highly distressing symptoms.
What kind of symptoms?
They were experiencing severe systemic joint pain. They reported intense burning sensations in their extremities. Their hands and feet felt like they were on fire. They were developing crippling cases of restless leg syndrome, that uncontrollable urge to move their limbs at night.
And the neurologist herself was actually doing the protocol, right? And she developed this agonizing, deep tissue buttock pain that was so severe she couldn't even sit in a chair while consulting with her patients.
Yes.
You can just imagine the absolute terror. She must be thinking, I fixed their sleep, but I've inadvertently poisoned them all with toxic levels of vitamin D.
It is the ultimate fear for a clinician, causing iatrogenic harm. And if we look at how siloed modern medicine is, a lesser doctor might have sent these patients out to specialists.
Oh, for sure.
They would have sent the joint pain to a rheumatologist, the burning feet to a neurologist for neuropathy, treating them as distinct, unrelated diseases.
But she knows they are chemically linked to her protocol.
Yeah.
And the breakthrough to solving this secondary crisis actually comes from a patient.
Yeah, this is incredible.
A patient walks in carrying a medical textbook from the 1950s that details research on pantothenic acid.
Pantothenic acid is more commonly known as vitamin B5. The book referenced a series of rather disturbing medical studies experiments that would likely not pass an ethics board today, conducted in conjunction with the Iowa State Prison in the 1950s.
Yeah, pretty dark stuff.
The researchers isolated a group of prisoners and intentionally fed them a diet that was completely devoid of vitamin B5, simply to observe the physiological collapse.
Which is horrifying, but the data it generated is the key to this entire mystery. What happened to the prisoners when they were stripped of B5?
The clinical deterioration was rapid and highly specific. Within 2 weeks of deprivation, the researchers documented 4 primary outcomes.
Okay.
First, the prisoners developed profound, intractable insomnia. Second, they suffered severe gastrointestinal distress, specifically massive belly bloating. Third, they developed a bizarre neurological symptom described as a puppet-like gait. Their legs were stiff, jerky, and uncoordinated when they tried to walk.
And the fourth.
And fourth, they experienced intense, agonizing burning sensations in their hands and feet.
The exact same burning hands and feet that her patients were experiencing.
Yes.
So she realizes it isn't vitamin D toxicity at all. She has somehow inadvertently induced a severe vitamin B5 deficiency. But I need you to explain the mechanics here. How does giving someone vitamin D cause their B vitamins to disappear?
To understand this, we have to look at the cellular economy of repair.
Yeah.
Think of the patient's bodies before the vitamin D protocol.
Right.
They were chronically deficient in the hormone, meaning they weren't entering deep sleep, meaning they weren't running their nightly repair programs.
Right.
The body was essentially in a state of indefinite deferred maintenance. It was surviving, but it was allowing microdamage to accumulate because it lacked the signal to initiate repairs.
The master breaker box was turned off?
Precisely. When the neurologist flooded their systems with optimal levels of vitamin D, she suddenly flipped the master breaker back on. The brainstem finally had the acetylcholine to paralyze the body. The parasympathetic nervous system roared to life, and the body essentially shouted, "We finally have the signal! Initiate all deferred maintenance immediately."
The cellular repair factories just went into overdrive?
Yes, but the repair process requires more than just the electrical signal.
It requires physical building blocks.
Exactly. It requires a molecule called coenzyme A.
Wait, slow down. Coenzyme A. You are introducing a new chemical. What exactly is this doing in the cell? Is it the mortar between the bricks?
Coenzyme A is arguably the most important metabolic currency in your body. It is required for the synthesis of fatty acids, the production of cholesterol, and the creation of the myelin sheath.
The myelin sheath.
That's the protective insulation wrapped around your nerves. Without coenzyme A, your nerves misfire. That is why the prisoners developed the puppet-like gait and the burning sensations. Their nerves were physically degrading because they couldn't maintain the myelin insulation.
Oh, wow. And where does coenzyme A come from?
It is synthesized directly from vitamin B5.
Okay, so by ramping up the repair system with vitamin D, the body rapidly chewed through its existing finite stores of B vitamins to create coenzyme A. It created a massive secondary deficiency. I want to use a better analogy than just building a house. It's like a massive manufacturing plant. For years, the power has been out, the lack of vitamin D.
Right.
The machines are silent. Suddenly, you restore the power, you crank the conveyor belts up to maximum speed, but the warehouse is completely empty of raw materials, the B vitamins.
The shelves are bare.
Yes. The motors are running hot, the demand is huge, but there is nothing on the belt to build with. The system just grinds itself to pieces.
That captures the metabolic crisis perfectly. The biochemical demand vastly outstripped the available supply.
Yeah.
But this discovery led the neurologist to a much deeper, more troubling question.
Which is?
These patients weren't starving prisoners. They were eating normal modern diets. Why couldn't they replenish their B5 levels from the food they were eating?
And this is where the source material drops the biggest bombshell.
Oh, it really is.
The link between sleep, the sun, and the gut microbiome.
Yeah.
Because it turns out we're not supposed to get the majority of our B vitamins from our food.
This completely upends how we think about human digestion. For over a century, Western medicine has largely viewed bacteria as pathogenic invaders to be sterilized and eradicated.
Just kill all the germs.
Right. But our gastrointestinal tract is actually host to trillions of commensal bacteria. We provide them a warm, nutrient-rich environment, and in exchange, they act as an internal chemical manufacturing plant. The healthy, normal microbiome in a human gut is the primary source of the 8 essential B vitamins our bodies require.
So we don't just eat vitamins, we farm them. We harvest them from the bacteria living inside our intestines.
Yes. The bacteria synthesize the B vitamins as a byproduct of their own metabolism. They secrete them into the intestinal lumen, and our gut lining absorbs them directly into our bloodstream.
That is amazing.
But here is the critical missing piece of the puzzle. Vitamin D is not just a hormone for the human brain. It is also a critical growth factor for these specific strains of bacteria.
Okay, let me see if I'm tracking the biological economy here, because this is an incredible stack of dependencies.
Go for it.
We are supposed to go outside. The UVB sunlight hits our skin and manufactures vitamin D. The vitamin D enters our bloodstream and splits its duties.
Right.
One portion goes to the brainstem, binds to the DNA, creates the enzyme, makes the acetylcholine, and prepares the brain for sleep. The other portion of the vitamin D goes to the gut and feeds the good bacteria.
Yes.
The bacteria consume the vitamin D, rapidly multiply, and excrete B vitamins. We absorb the B vitamins, turn them into coenzyme A, and hand that to the brainstem so it has the raw materials to actually execute the repair protocols while we sleep.
It is a perfectly balanced, bidirectional, symbiotic loop engineered by millions of years of evolution. The sun feeds the human feeds the bacteria feed the human. But the entire engine is reliant on the continuous input of solar radiation.
Which explains the collapse. When we moved indoors, starting with the widespread adoption of central air conditioning and desktop computers in the 1980s, we abruptly cut off the primary fuel source.
We severed the loop. We often blame the destruction of the human microbiome on the overprescription of broad-spectrum antibiotics, and they certainly cause massive collateral damage.
Sure.
But the source argues that the foundational collapse, the reason the microbiome couldn't recover, was profound vitamin D deficiency. By removing ourselves from the sun, we literally starved our internal ecosystem to death.
The good bacteria died off, and with them, our internal supply chain of B vitamins just vanished. So as a listener, the immediate reaction is, okay, my gut is broken, the bacteria are dead, I will just go to the pharmacy, buy a massive bottle of B-complex vitamins and a bottle of high-end probiotics, and I'll just take them every day for the rest of my life.
That is the modern consumerist approach to health, right? But the source uses a brilliant biological analogy to explain why that strategy almost universally fails. You cannot think of the microbiome as a static garden where you just plant seeds and they stay there. You have to conceptualize the gut as a fast-moving river.
The river analogy, walk us through this because it changes how we view probiotics.
The bacteria residing in your small intestine right now will largely be excreted by tomorrow. The bacteria present tomorrow are the literal great-granddaughters of the ones there today. They reproduce at a staggering exponential rate.
Okay.
To sustain that level of hyperreproduction, they require a constant, unyielding supply of their specific environmental growth factors, primarily vitamin D and existing B vitamins.
Which means if you just swallow a capsule of freeze-dried probiotics, you are dropping dormant bacteria into a hostile, barren environment.
Exactly. You are throwing seeds onto dry concrete. If your gut lining lacks the vitamin D to feed them and lacks the established B vitamin nutrient soil, those expensive probiotic strains cannot colonize.
Yeah.
They wake up, they starve, they die, and they wash downstream.
It is a total waste of money if the underlying chemical environment hasn't been repaired. And the neurologist learned the hard way that trying to blindly fix that environment with supplements is highly dangerous. Knowing the biochemistry is only half the battle, applying it safely without triggering a metabolic crisis is where the stakes get incredibly high.
This transition from theoretical biochemistry to clinical application is fraught with risk.
Yeah.
We've been conditioned to view vitamins as harmless. I mean, they are literally sold as gummy bears in the grocery store.
Right.
But in reality, when used at high doses, they are potent biohacking tools that forcibly alter the operational capacity of your central nervous system.
We have to talk about the danger of biohacking here, because the neurologist herself made a severe miscalculation. When she realized a B5 deficiency was causing her agonizing buttock pain and her patient's burning feet, she went to the pharmacy and bought a bottle of isolated vitamin B5.
She did.
The 1950s textbook noted that 400 milligrams was the therapeutic dose used on the prisoners, so she just took 400 milligrams.
She assumed a linear relationship, If a deficiency causes the problem, a massive dose will fix it quickly.
But the result was disastrous. Within a week of taking that 400 milligram dose, her buttock pain amplified tenfold, and she developed excruciating restless leg syndrome.
It got worse.
Way worse. Her patients who tried the same aggressive dose called her in a panic. They reported feeling like they were vibrating, they were highly agitated, and their insomnia returned with a vengeance.
This highlights the body's absolute demand for precise, delicate balance. The B vitamins, particularly B5, act as powerful excitatory agents to the nervous system when taken in isolation or high doses. They operate similarly to a massive dose of high-octane caffeine.
Oh, wow.
If you flood a depleted system with 400 milligrams of an excitatory compound, the brainstem becomes hyper-aroused.
The master breaker box detects a massive power surge. It says, the voltage is too high, it's not safe to paralyze the body right now, and it abruptly shuts off the sleep protocols entirely to protect the system.
Precisely. The biological systems are equally disrupted by a deficiency and an overdose. In both extremes, the fail-safe is the suspension of REM sleep. So the neurologist was forced to meticulously map out a protocol that could safely jumpstart the microbial factory without frying the nervous system.
And this evolution became known as the right sleep protocol. Let's break down exactly what she outlined in the source because it requires extreme precision.
It does.
First, she checks the patient's vitamin B12 levels. If they are clinically low, she supplements B12 separately. Second, she introduces vitamin D. But she doesn't use a generic dose. She tests the blood, prescribes a dose, and adjusts it over months until the blood concentration stabilizes around 60 nanograms per milliliter.
Right.
Third, she includes a basic, low-dose daily multivitamin simply to supply the trace minerals required for enzymatic reactions. But the fourth step is the fulcrum of the entire protocol, the B50 complex.
The B50 complex is a specific formulation containing exactly 50 milligrams of all 8 essential B vitamins. It is a massive sudden influx of microbial growth factors.
Okay.
You're essentially flooding the desolate gut environment with the exact chemical nutrients the surviving commensal bacteria desperately need to rapidly reproduce and rebuild their colonies.
But there is a massive, non-negotiable catch to this step. You only take the B50 complex for exactly 3 months. Not 4 months, not a year. 3 months.
That time limitation is the most critical safety parameter she discovered. The objective is not to artificially supply the human body with synthetic B vitamins forever.
Right?
The goal is to use the supplement solely as a temporary scaffolding to jumpstart the gut microbiome. Once you provide those concentrated growth factors for 90 days, the healthy bacterial populations explode, they recolonize the intestinal lining, and they reach a critical mass where they begin manufacturing optimal levels of B vitamins endogenously.
So what happens if you ignore the rule? What happens if a patient feels great at 3 months and decides to keep taking the B50 pills indefinitely?
They push themselves into a toxic overdose. By month 4, your bacteria are now producing a full, healthy supply of B vitamins internally. If you continue to dump 50 milligrams of synthetic B vitamins on top of that natural production, you overwhelm the nervous system.
Ah, I see.
You push the body into that hyper-aroused, caffeinated state. The systemic inflammation returns, the agitation spikes, and the insomnia comes back.
I want to visualize this for the listener. It's exactly like using jumper cables on a dead car battery. Your gut microbiome is the dead battery. You hook up the jumper cables, the B50 supplements to an external power source, and you get the engine turning over.
He roars to life.
But once your car's alternator is spinning and naturally generating an electrical charge to sustain the battery, you have to disconnect the cables. If you leave the jumper cables hooked up to another power source while driving down the highway at 70 miles an hour, you are going to completely fry the vehicle's electrical system.
That is an excellent mechanical representation of the biochemistry. The supplement is the jumper cable. Once the internal biological alternator of the microbiome is running, you must remove the external power source.
The source material grounds this theory by providing 2 incredibly detailed case studies that show how radically different this repair process can look depending on how deeply damaged the patient's battery is. Let's look at Melanie first. Melanie is 32 years old. She has the redhead genetic mutation. She is 100 pounds overweight. She suffers from polycystic ovary syndrome, gestational diabetes, chronic daily headaches, and burning neuropathy in her feet. She is taking 9 different prescription medications just to function.
Melanie represents a state of profound, compounding, long-term cellular decay. Her biological repair systems have been offline for decades.
Right.
She hasn't just depleted her current chemical reserves, she has structural damage throughout her vascular and nervous systems. When she initiates the protocol getting her vitamin D levels to 60 and doing the 3-month B vitamin jumpstart, her body recognizes that the power is finally back on, and it initiates a massive systemic triage and repair effort.
But that level of repair requires immense ongoing resources. The source notes in unbelievable detail. Melanie had to consume 30,000 IUs of vitamin D a day for 4 straight years just to keep her blood levels at 60. A normal maintenance dose is maybe 2,000 or 5,000 IUs.
That astonishing dosage reveals the sheer metabolic desperation of her cells. Her body wasn't just casually circulating the vitamin D, it was actively chewing through 30,000 IUs every single day to fuel the biological construction crews that were attempting to rebuild her myelin sheaths, balance her endocrine system, and resolve her neuroinflammation.
That's wild.
And over those 4 years, it worked. She was able to systematically wean off multiple pain medications, her chronic headaches vanished, and she regained enough neurological stability to return to the workforce.
It's a miraculous recovery, though the text notes she didn't actually lose the 100 pounds initially. The body prioritized neurological survival and repair over aesthetic fat loss.
Exactly.
Now, contrast Milan's 4-year battle with Natalie. Natalie is a healthy, fit, competitive triathlete. She has dark, tan skin, she trains outside constantly, but after the birth of her second child, she crashes. She develops severe insomnia, debilitating postpartum depression, and daily headaches. She's eating a strict paleo diet, she's doing everything right according to wellness culture, but her system is fundamentally broken.
Natalie's case is fascinating because it isolates the specific metabolic toll of human reproduction. Pregnancy requires a truly staggering amount of biological resources, specifically coenzyme A, to construct the fetal nervous system and sustain the mother's elevated blood volume.
Right.
Because coenzyme A is derived from vitamin B5, Natalie essentially drained her internal reserves dry to build her second child.
She depleted the battery completely, but the underlying hardware was still in good shape.
Exactly. She hadn't accumulated decades of structural damage like Milan. She was just out of fuel. So for Natalie, the intervention was incredibly rapid. Because she was fundamentally healthy, she only required the standard short 3-month cycle of the B50 protocol.
Wow, just 3 months.
That 90-day jumpstart immediately repopulated her microbiome, replenished her coenzyme A reserves, and allowed her brainstem to resume normal acetylcholine production. Her postpartum depression evaporated, her resting heart rate normalized, her sleep returned, and she resumed training for triathlons.
It's incredible to see the underlying mechanism verified across such drastically different clinical presentations. But if we pull back from the individual case studies and look at the macro level, if this biochemical theory is accurate, how on earth did billions of human beings end up with this exact same chemical deficiency at the exact same moment in history?
To comprehend the sheer scale of the epidemic, we really have to examine the behavioral timeline of the last 40 years. The source utilizes an AI-generated historical summary to perfectly articulate the timeline of our biological downfall.
It paints a very stark picture of our retreat from our natural habitat. It breaks it down into 3 distinct phases.
Let's hear them.
First, the 1980s. This is the era when the CPAP machine was invented, but more importantly, it is the decade society fully migrated indoors. Widespread adoption of central air conditioning made it comfortable to stay inside all summer. Personal computers anchored us to desks inside fluorescent-lit office buildings. We stopped going outside during the critical peak hours of UVB radiation.
And we must factor in the public health messaging of that era. Simultaneously, the medical and dermatological establishments launched a massive, aggressive public health campaign demonizing the sun.
Oh, right, the sunscreen boom.
We're told to slather on chemical sunscreens or face inevitable skin cancer. This effectively neutralized whatever minimal, incidental UVB exposure the population was still receiving during their commutes or short walks.
We chemically blocked the sun. Then we entered the 2000s, the second phase. The digital epidemic, the era of the smartphone. Now, not only are we starved of the intense daytime solar radiation that signals our biological clock to wake up, we are holding intensely bright screens inches from our faces at 11:00 p.m.
It is the ultimate circadian mismatch. We bombard our retinas with artificial blue light at night, confusing the brainstem into believing the sun is still high in the sky.
Which stops melatonin, right?
It suppresses the natural release of melatonin and forcibly delays the transition into the parasympathetic state. We removed the anchoring biological cue of daytime brightness and introduced a highly disruptive artificial cue of nighttime illumination.
And then the final phase. The 2020 pandemic lockdowns. Governments legally mandated that people remain inside their homes, completely isolating an already biologically starved indoor population. The source throws out a statistic that is almost hard to process. 90% of Americans currently spend an average of 22 hours a day entirely indoors.
It's staggering.
And 20% of Americans literally never go outside for any meaningful amount of time at all.
Biologically speaking, we have placed ourselves in solitary confinement. We are an obligate diurnal species. We evolved as day hunters, and we are currently living like subterranean moles. We are existing in a habitat our biology does not recognize.
Which naturally brings up the popular concept of chronotypes. We hear this defense all the time in modern culture. I'm just a genetic night owl, or I do my best creative work at 2 a.m. It is pitched as an unchangeable, inherent personality trait. But the neurologist completely rejects this premise.
She argues forcefully that true genetic night owls, individuals whose baseline biochemistry genuinely requires them to sleep from 4 a.m. to noon, are incredibly rare anomalies. The vast majority of people identifying as night owls are actually just individuals suffering from severe, untreated circadian and chemical imbalances.
Wow.
The human organism is fundamentally designed to be highly active during peak solar radiation and unconscious during the dark.
Now, wait, I have to stop you there and push back on her conclusion. Are we really saying that the millions of people who consider themselves natural night owls are just biochemically damaged? Doesn't evolutionary biology suggest that a tribe of early humans needed some genetic variance?
Regarding the camp theory, yeah.
Right. Wouldn't they need some people naturally awake at night to tend the fire and guard the camp from predators? Calling them damaged feels like a massive clinical leap.
It is a valid evolutionary hypothesis.
Hmm.
However, the neurologist grounds her counter-argument in clinical outcomes. She notes that when she took these self-proclaimed lifelong night owls and severe shift workers and put them on the vitamin D and B vitamin protocol, when she physically repaired their brainstem chemistry, their genetic preference for the night vanished.
It just went away.
Once their microbiome was restored and they were producing adequate acetylcholine, they invariably and naturally reverted to a standard 10:00 p.m. to 6 a.m. diurnal sleep schedule. Their bodies desperately wanted to be day hunters. They were simply trapped in a delayed phase because they lacked the chemical signaling to align with the sun.
So the personality trait was actually just a symptom of a broken biochemical ecosystem. It's a bitter pill to swallow for the 2.0 AM creatives, but the clinical data is hard to argue with. And it's not just the absence of light that is destroying this ecosystem, it's what we are actively feeding it. If the gut microbiome is our internal B vitamin factory, what happens when we feed that factory the wrong materials?
This is where the intersection of diet and sleep becomes critical. The source utilizes historical precedents of pure carbohydrate diets to illustrate how quickly the microbiome can be weaponized against us.
It's pretty grim history.
She cites two horrific historical epidemics. First, the outbreak of beriberi in the Japanese prisoner of war camps during World War II. The prisoners were kept outdoors, performing hard labor in the sun, so they had abundant vitamin D.
Yeah.
But their captors fed them a diet consisting almost exclusively of polished white rice.
A pure, refined, fiberless carbohydrate.
Exactly. And within months, the prisoners developed beriberi, a disease characterized by heart failure and severe neurological burning in the feet and legs.
There's that burning symptom again.
Yes. Why? Because a pure carbohydrate diet aggressively selects for strains of gut bacteria that do not produce essential B vitamins. The lack of fiber and protein starved the commensal bacteria, altering the microbiome so profoundly that the prisoners lost their internal vitamin supply chain and developed a deadly deficiency.
Wow.
The moment the Red Cross intervened and provided meat and vegetables, the microbiome shifted back, the B vitamins returned, and the neurological symptoms resolved.
And the source mentions a remarkably similar tragedy closer to home, the pellagra epidemic in the United States in the 1930s. Institutionalized patients in the American South, often in psychiatric hospitals or orphanages, were fed incredibly cheap diets consisting of nothing but corn gruel.
Right.
Again, a pure monolithic carbohydrate diet destroyed the microbiome's ability to produce niacin, leading to severe dermatitis, dementia, madness, and mass death. It proves beyond a doubt that a pure carbohydrate diet is fundamentally hostile to the specific bacteria that keep our central nervous systems functioning.
And while our modern standard diet is obviously more complex than just corn gruel or white rice, the reliance on ultra-processed, high-sugar, low-fiber foods pushes our microbiome in that exact same dangerous direction. We are chronically starving the beneficial bacteria of the diverse dietary fibers and complex proteins they require to maintain the B vitamin factory.
Speaking of things directly altering the nervous system, we have to discuss the most bizarre outlier case in the entire text. The neurologist details a patient who managed to completely cure her narcolepsy using over-the-counter nicotine patches.
Well, this case is fascinating.
Narcolepsy, a devastating neurological disease where a patient uncontrollably loses consciousness and collapses during the day.
It sounds entirely counterintuitive, and frankly, given the public stigma surrounding nicotine, it sounds dangerous. But when you analyze it through the biochemical framework we've just established, it makes perfect logical sense.
How so?
Narcolepsy represents a profound, catastrophic failure of the sleep-wake toggles within the brainstem. The system cannot maintain arousal. And what is the primary neurotransmitter governing those switches?
Acetylcholine, the very chemical we need vitamin D to manufacture.
Precisely. And if you look at the molecular structure of nicotine, it is a fascinating anomaly. Nicotine is one of the only compounds on Earth that almost perfectly mimics the molecular shape of acetylcholine. It binds to the exact same nicotinic receptors in the human brain.
So, by applying a steady-state nicotine patch to her skin, this narcoleptic patient was artificially flooding her brainstem with a synthetic substitute for the acetylcholine her body was failing to produce.
She was manually overriding the system.
It forced the master breaker box to stay locked in the awake position during the day, which ironically allowed it to build enough pressure to run the proper repair cycles at night.
It is an incredible, highly specific biochemical hack. Now, it must be stated emphatically that this is a proof of concept for the acetylcholine theory, not a recommendation for the general public to begin using highly addictive nicotine patches for sleep issues.
Absolutely. Do not go buy nicotine patches. But it brings up a crucial question for the listener. I'm listening to this and I'm hearing about massive 30,000 IU doses of vitamin D. I'm hearing about the dangers of 400 milligrams of B5 causing restless legs. I'm hearing about 3-month strict B50 cycles and constant blood monitoring. It sounds exhausting and potentially risky. Is there a way to fix this without a pharmacy? How did our ancestors maintain this loop naturally?
The source is unequivocal on this point. The natural environmental path is always the preferred path, provided your biological system hasn't degraded to the point of daily chronic pain or severe apnea. If you are just struggling with poor sleep or mild anxiety, the prescription is beautifully simple, albeit difficult to execute consistently in modern society.
The natural alternative. Step 1 is obvious. You have to get outside.
You have to get outside. And not just for a 5-minute walk from your car to the office. You need sustained environmental exposure. And the source makes a critical point to alleviate the fear of skin damage. You do not have to bake in direct, blazing sunlight to achieve this.
Okay, good to know.
Even on a completely overcast day, up to 80% of UV radiation still penetrates light cloud cover. Your skin is still synthesizing vitamin D. It just requires a longer duration of exposure. Furthermore, even if you are sitting completely in the shade, protected from direct UVB light, you are still being bathed in ambient near-infrared light from the sun.
And the text highlights near-infrared light as a critical, completely overlooked piece of the puzzle.
It is vital. Near-infrared light penetrates deep beneath the skin, passing directly into our tissues, where it interacts with our mitochondria, the power plants of our cells. It literally charges our cellular batteries and reduces systemic inflammation. It is a form of direct energy transfer from the sun that we miss entirely when we spend our days illuminated by synthetic blue-heavy LED lights in an office.
So, step 1, re-engage with the solar environment. Step 2, re-engage with the microbial environment through your diet, specifically to rebuild that B vitamin factory.
This requires a return to traditional food preparation methods. Bring on the fermented foods.
Kimchi, kefir, raw sauerkraut, traditional kombucha.
Exactly. Before the advent of modern refrigeration and chemical preservatives, human populations preserved their harvest through lactofermentation. They consumed massive quantities of naturally fermented foods daily.
Right.
These foods are not just culturally significant, they are teeming with incredibly diverse, robust, living bacterial cultures. When you consume a portion of raw, unpasteurized sauerkraut, you are ingesting a potent, naturally occurring probiotic.
But unlike the freeze-dried pills that just wash downstream, this natural probiotic comes packaged with its own survival gear.
That is the key distinction. Traditional fermented foods contain the living bacteria, but they also contain the prebiotics, the exact fibers those bacteria have evolved to eat, and they contain the metabolic byproducts the bacteria have already produced during fermentation, which includes natural, highly bioavailable B vitamins.
That makes so much sense.
You are not just dropping naked seeds onto concrete, you're transplanting a thriving, self-contained ecosystem, complete with its own nutrient-rich soil, directly into your gut.
It is nature's B50 complex, perfectly balanced and safely regulated by millions of years of evolution. The host in the original source material literally points to a jar of kimchi on his desk and asks the neurologist, instead of all these pills, why don't I just eat a bowl of this stuff and spend my mornings sitting in the sunshine? And she enthusiastically agrees. That is the ultimate, sustainable, long-term fix for the human animal.
It demands a fundamental lifestyle shift.
Yeah.
It requires us to stop trying to biohack our way out of a broken environment and instead return to the environmental inputs our physiology was genetically programmed to expect.
We have covered a staggering amount of biochemistry today. We've gone from CPAP machines and brainstem paralysis to 1950s prison experiments, genetic mutations, and the power of sauerkraut. Let's synthesize all of this and bring it together for the listener.
The core takeaway is a radical, empowering reframing of how your body operates. You must abandon the idea that sleep is a passive state of rest that you just drift into. It is a highly active, metabolically demanding, biologically expensive process.
Right.
It is centrally managed by the brainstem, which utilizes the neurotransmitter acetylcholine to safely paralyze your physical form so it can execute deep, critical repair protocols on your vascular and nervous systems.
But to manufacture that acetylcholine, your brain is entirely dependent on vitamin D, a hormone that you must synthesize on your skin using ultraviolet light from the sun. And to complete those physical repair processes, your body requires a massive ongoing supply of coenzyme A and B vitamins, which are manufactured internally by a healthy, robust gut microbiome.
And that microbiome, in turn, relies on that exact same vitamin D to survive and reproduce. It's an elegant, delicate, profoundly interconnected loop. If you migrate indoors and block the sun, you break the loop at its source.
Oh, falls apart.
The vitamin D levels plummet, the gut bacteria starve and die, the internal B vitamin supply chain collapses, the acetylcholine production halts, the brainstem panics, and your entire sleep architecture crumbles.
And while the neurologist proved you can forcefully jumpstart the system with precise, medically monitored supplements, balancing high-dose vitamin D with a strict 90-day cycle of B50, the ultimate goal is to restore the natural biological loop through sunlight and fermented foods.
What I want the listener to deeply internalize is this. If you are currently suffering from chronic insomnia, unexplained daily pain, severe anxiety, or mysterious neurological symptoms, and you feel like your body is fundamentally broken or betraying you, well, it isn't.
Right, it's doing its job.
Your body is functioning exactly as it was designed to function under conditions of severe resource deprivation. It is desperately, intelligently signaling that it lacks the chemical raw materials required to safely execute the parasympathetic rest and digest protocol.
It is not a moral failing that you cannot sleep. It is a mechanical, chemical failure of the environment you are in. And that brings me to a final, provocative thought that really crystallized for me while reading through this source material.
Let's hear it.
We spend so much time in our modern culture psychologizing our distress. We blame our anxiety on external societal factors. We blame our demanding jobs. We blame the toxicity of social media algorithms. We blame the relentless 24/7 news cycle. We sit in bed at night staring at the ceiling and we think we can't sleep because we are overthinking our lives.
We view a biological crisis through a purely psychological lens.
But what if our modern epidemic of anxiety, that specific, crushing feeling of dread at 3:00 a.m., isn't a psychological failing at all? What if that racing mind, that hypervigilance in the dark, is simply your brain stem intentionally and desperately trying to keep you awake?
Wow.
Because on a deep, primitive chemical level, it knows it lacks the acetylcholine required to safely paralyze your airway. It refuses to let you sleep because it calculates that you will not survive the physical vulnerability of REM sleep without the proper chemicals.
It intentionally traps you in the sympathetic fight or flight state because, structurally, that is the only operating system it has the fuel to run.
So maybe you aren't inherently an anxious, broken person. Maybe you aren't hopelessly stressed by the state of the world. Maybe you are just a day hunter trapped in a dark indoor box, biochemically starving, and your brain is just frantically waiting for the sun to come up.
It is a profoundly powerful perspective shift. The diagnostic muddy waters of sleep and anxiety that we started this conversation with suddenly look a lot clearer when you understand the mechanics and finally turn the lights on.
They really do. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly illuminating deep dive. Go get some sun, eat some kimchi, and we'll see you next time.